Good evening, everyone. It is March 22, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we are talking about Apple hiring Kevin Lynch from Adobe. We are talking about the competitive market in 2013, and we're talking about our thoughts for iOS 7. This is the iMore Show. Joining me today is the senior mobile editor, or one of the senior mobile editors from The Verge, Bohn. How are you, Dieter?
I am doing very well. How are you, Rene?
Good. I know you hate when I drag this kind of stuff up, but just for the audience, Dieter actually created this show. And not only did he hire me originally for iMore, but he started me off in podcasting. So now some 340 odd episodes later, Dieter, you're back.
Yeah, no, I actually, I just tweeted it myself that I was coming on. And so I went and I hunted down the completely broken page from the original Phone Different podcast from July 30th, 2007. So this show in its various iterations is creeping up on its 6-year anniversary. It's
fantastic. It's unbelievable to me because I remember when you first hired me, my whole thing to you was, Dieter, it's one phone on one network. There's no way that I'm going to be able to write anything every day. It's not going to be anything to write about.
Yeah, that turned out to be wrong. There's plenty to write about, and maybe soon, I don't know if we don't need to talk about this, but maybe soon there'll be more than one phone on, multiple networks.
Let's dive into that. I mean, that I think is, because we look at the competitive landscape, and I know I was at New York with Phil doing the Galaxy S4, and you had Nile and I think Dan there covering it. And this is the competition Apple's facing, the HTC One, the Galaxy S4, and they keep doing it with, so far, one phone a year, almost always within the same 3-month period. And I don't know how long that's a tenable situation for them.
I think that they can do it as long as their phone doesn't feel stale, and as long as it is capturing the popular imagination. Actually, I think that if I'm Apple, I'm less concerned about. I'm concerned about the Galaxy S4, obviously. I'm not super concerned about the HTC One. But I am also concerned about, and this is going to sound insane, but bear with me, I'm a little bit concerned about the also-rans. I'm a little bit concerned about Windows Phone, and I'm a little bit concerned about, bear with me, Tizen, and maybe even a little tiny bit Firefox, because they are, everybody has admitted and given up on the U.S. market. U.S. market, they're not giving up. They're still trying, but everybody sort of gets that.
It's BlackBerry launch day in the U.S. today, right?
It's BlackBerry launch day. Hopefully they do okay. I'd like to see more competition and have it not be a 2-horse race in the U.S., but I think that dynamic isn't likely to change very soon. But where things are a lot more fluid is in developing and emerging markets. So China, Indonesia, Africa, and Latin America, there's a lot more opportunity on the low end to bring stuff in. And the question I think Apple has to answer there is last year's and 2 years ago's model of the iPhone sufficient to compete in those markets? And if it's not, is Apple comfortable with ceding some of that stuff to some of those crazy new entrants, or do they want to take them on?
I think also there's a case that could be made, and I think we talked about that with Arnold Kim a couple of weeks ago, where the previous generation iPhones are so good that they become an easy choice to make over the brand new iPhone, and then the average sales price, even in first world markets, comes down, which may not concern Apple too much, but seems to concern the market a lot.
Right.
And maybe a cheap plastic alternative makes people buy more of the high-priced premium one just because they don't want the cheap plastic version.
Yeah, well, the question is, is somebody more likely to buy a cheap plastic new iPhone than they are last year's iPhone? Is there a stigma attached to buying last year's iPhone that's strong enough that you would not do it, but you would buy something that's basically the exact same specs but came out this year?
And I think Tim Cook fielded this on the conference call when the analysts were asking what the mix was, and he said, iPhone 5 mix is pretty much what iPhone 4S mix is. But when iPhone 5 becomes $100 cheaper against this, presumably a similar looking iPhone 5S, do more people start buying the 5 to save $100? And then does that affect iPhone 5S sales?
Yeah, and to be blunt, it's a failure of imagination, but I am hard pressed to tell you what they could put in a 5S that would make people think that the 5 was old and stale.
Is it is it insane that we live in a world now where people looked at the Galaxy S4 event and said, "Oh, it's a Galaxy, 3S." I can't get their names right. G3S thing, whatever.
Yeah, it is, but it's also I think that it's a sign of Samsung's confidence that Samsung dominates the market. They dominate the Android market, and they are able to put out a phone that, yeah, it's got a bigger screen and faster, and it's your standard spec, race kind of phone, but the design is so similar. And I don't think it's that Samsung thinks it has the most beautiful, perfect design phone ever. Maybe they do, but I mean, it's clearly not. It's an okay looking Android phone. But it shows that Samsung has confidence in their leadership position, that they don't need to try and do a crazy new iteration of a phone every year. They can just be like, yep, we're Samsung. We can put out, the same design and try and maintain that consistency. I mean, just look at, here, I'm such a nerd. I've got phones on my desk. Look at what HTC had to do from last year to this year. They went from this is the 1X from last year. It's a very good looking phone, polycarbonate, unibody, blah, 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 to here's the 1 this year. They have to keep on completely redesigning stuff and changing their industrial design and changing their software to try and find some way to gain traction in the market. Whereas Samsung can just keep on keeping on, and they're allowed to do that because they've got such a huge market share and such a huge marketing presence.
Yeah, and you were talking about the 5S, and if Apple holds to pattern, because Apple's not predictable, but they are sort of like they do seem to stick to certain patterns. We would get an iPhone 5 casing with presumably a more advanced processor, which could be faster, but will likely also be maybe a smaller die size, more power efficient, and we could get a better camera. And that no longer just means more megapixels, but could mean better optics, better glass, better sensor. But those are the trademark improvements. The rest for the S series has always been some software feature like FaceTime or Siri. And I think Apple, especially with the pressure being put on by Google, the services start becoming much more important in these off years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really hope that they can get their services story figured out. And I mean, I've been reporting on Dropbox more lately because the company's opening up a bit more. They're having people over to their headquarters. And I mean, I think they're probably, working towards getting an IPO. And Dropbox is becoming a really interesting story. They just bought Mailbox. They bought a photo service. They bought a music service a while ago, I think. But just compare that. Almost. Yeah, exactly. But compare that to iCloud. And I mean, I don't know. I try to use iCloud maybe once every 3 to 4 months. And I just can't handle it. I'm not fond of the way any of it works. And I don't think it's because I'm a curmudgeon that wants my file system. I really don't. I am a curmudgeon and I do want my file system, but I don't think that's the only reason that I'm not fond of iCloud. And I don't think developers are especially fond of it either. And it's funny because like fixing that is not a super like flashy, cool, thing that you can get up on a keynote stage and be like, we've made our API better. Like you could do that, but like nobody's going to write that headline and be interested in that. And, sales reps in the store aren't going to push that. But that's the kind of boring work that they need to do. They need to just sort of like incrementally push day after day, week after week to make their cloud services better and in the way that Google has or Dropbox has.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I like the file system a lot. My mom is completely confused by a file system to the extent that she will call me and ask me where her documents are. So I have this ideal world in my head where, because I love Dropbox, it works great, but it's too normal, it's too traditional for someone like my mom. She doesn't even bother with her Dropbox account, which drives me nuts. And iCloud is simple enough for her to use, but for me it's broken on so many levels. Like core data sync doesn't work. All your files are locked into apps, so if you switch apps, you no longer have access to your files. And it's of the future, but just doesn't work. And I would love there to be some system that had Dropbox sort of underneath, and on top of that had an iCloud layer, and for all of it to actually work. I think would be my ideal.
Well, I think Dropbox wants to do that. I don't know about iCloud, but they understand that cloud storage is a commodity business. Cloud storage is like selling toilet paper. Yeah. It's like you can go to any corner store and get cloud storage. So they need to find a way to layer on services on top of that and layer on features on top of that that are actually useful and interesting. And they're making steps in that direction, but they're not moving quickly enough, I think. But that's the competition for Apple. It's Google and it's Dropbox for like that sort of basic, syncing cloud storage stuff.
Do you think Dropbox has to get off S3 eventually to be their own person, or do you think they're fine with S3 for the long haul?
I don't know. I think they're probably fine with S3 for quite a while, unless Amazon decides to get serious, right, and like somehow make life worse for them.
The Kindle phone has been announced, and we're deprecating a bunch of S3.
I think we're going to see a Kindle phone. I think that the story, maybe not of 2013, but 2014, if this new management shakeup at Google doesn't get itself figured out, doesn't get Google on a new path for Android, I think that there's a really big chance that we're going to see a trend of companies going the Amazon route with Android. We might see Samsung go the Amazon route with Android and basically completely fork Android. And that's a real danger for Google, and it's a real danger for their whole ecosystem.
I want to get into that, but you raised an interesting point too, and it's something that we discussed a long time ago. Is that Scott Forstall no longer at Apple, Andy Rubin no longer at Google, and not only are those two people he's at
don't
Google,
forget Steven Sinofsky at Microsoft.
Steven Sinofsky, but he was more of a desktop guy. The interesting thing with me about Forstall and Rubin is that they were mobile guys taken off their mobile projects, and their mobile projects were handed to the traditional at Apple explicitly the OS 10 desktop platform guy, and at Google to the Chrome OS apps guy, which is arguably Google's desktop platform.
Yeah.
And mobile is the future. Mobile's where everything is going. But it seems like the minute these things are growing up and mature, they're kind of taking it away from the mobile guys and saying, all right, you don't know how to run a platform. The old guys do. You've had your day in the sun.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of dynamics going on with Andy Rubin specifically, and him moving over to the Google X Labs or whatever. And we've got a story up looking at some of the issues, and I mean, it's like Rubin was really good at like starting something, but I don't know if he's just that interested in maintaining Android long term. He's much better at new projects. But do you really get that sense about Forstall? That Forstall was like he was a startup guy, but can't keep running a platform. Is that what you think the dynamic was there?
I don't think that. I think maybe at a certain point for Apple, it was more important to have iOS as being run by their platform guy rather than being run by an iOS guy. That Tim Cook had this vision for, and I do this analogy before, but when Steve Jobs came to Apple, he destroyed the product line and said he said consumer, professional, desktop, and laptop. And I think Tim Cook wanted to do that, and he decided, okay, we have technology, design, hardware, and software. And individual buckets like the iOS guy didn't really fit into that anymore. So it was almost like a new vision.
Right. So is that your analysis of this story that came out in the Wall Street Journal, I guess, yesterday as we're recording, that there's a new spirit of collaboration at Apple with design, and Jony Ive is doing his job, basically what we expected, that he's working with both software and hardware people and moving towards a flatter design for iOS?
I think they put a bunch of stuff together. Like they sort of packed a bunch of stuff into that story.
Yeah.
Jony Ive, as far as I heard, he's been there since he got that job. He's been in the labs, and some people are thrilled to have him there because Jony Ive,
right.
That is as close as you get to an all-star of design, and people are thrilled to have him in the labs. iOS 7 has been in development since before iOS 6 launched. That's the way any product roadmap works. You have your feature set, what you can do in a certain point of time, and features that go beyond that. And they're probably ramping up on iOS 8. And this with Google, right? Mateus Duarte went from WebOS to Android, and he had to kind of get in there midstream. And I think the expectation from some people is that he's going to go in with a sandblaster and remove anything that resembles a texture from iOS. But from his public statements, is that he really believes that design is all about usability and aspects of usability. If I open an app and I can't tell what app it is at a glance, if all of it is UIKit, that's a massive usability hit for iOS. So I think he's going to have a much more nuanced approach than an extremist one.
Well, I think he has to. I think that consistency and familiarity is super important to Apple. And I mean, I know everybody's fond, and you were probably the first person to start saying this years ago that we're going to see iOS be the oldest, mobile OS, that's viable on the market, and we're there. Here we are. And so the question is, do they get caught in a Microsoft Windows scenario where they feel beholden to backwards compatibility? And I don't mean app compatibility. I basically mean like design compatibility. Is like their big challenge now is to move their OS forward to a place where it feels like I'm not making a compromise by moving from a Mac to an iOS device like an iPad or even an iPhone. Can they add power to the platform without making it overcomplicated? Without making it maybe it's complicated to say Android is for some people, but also keep consistency. Like those three things all need to happen, and balancing those is the kind of thing that you need somebody like Jony Ive to handle.
I think one of the most important things with him is if you get rid of a Scott Forstall and you tell people they're reporting to someone new, whether it's the hardware guy or the software guy, having that person be Jony Ive just removes a lot of barriers that you might face, both from an outside and an inside perspective, because people won't panic. Oh, Scott Forstall's gone. Hey, everyone, remember Jony Ive?
Right.
He's kind of assuring. But I agree with you completely. I think when I see a lot of like iOS 7 wish lists, to me it's the last thing I want. Like the podcast app was updated yesterday, and the reel-to-reel is gone. And people think that's the tea leaves of the future. For me, stuff like that is the least of the things I want them fixing. It's a lot of what you mentioned. Neither Android nor iOS is complete to me. And they're all haunted by the decisions of their original architecture. Android was supposed to be this Windows Mobile standard, this BlackBerry thing, and they pivoted really smartly into an iPhone, but their display layers never caught up. They don't have good compositing, they don't have good masking, they don't push pixels as well as iOS. And iOS arguably was never really meant to run third-party apps, and they've bolted on multitasking, they've bolted on fast app switching, and it doesn't work as well as something like Android, which was conceived of to do this. So they both are sort of trying to recover, but neither of them have good experiences in their areas of weakness yet.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm realistic with myself and not, dreaming pie in the sky, throw everything away and start new, what I want most in iOS 7 is probably some sort of better inter-app communication. Android's got that little share panel, which is kind of a mess, but it works really well. Windows has got charms, which I don't know why we were calling them charms, whatever.
Contracts and intents.
Contracts and intents, oh my God. But I feel like apps in iOS are just way, way too siloed, way too often. I mean, I just jailbroke my iPhone earlier this week.
Okay.
And I did it basically for three things. One, so I could quickly get to toggles to toggle Wi-Fi and tethering and Bluetooth. And two, so I could set Chrome as my default browser and do the scary security thing and give it access to the faster JavaScript engine.
Yeah.
And it's great. I'm super happy. I also remapped long press the home button to Google Search instead of Siri.
Nice. Yeah, we should
sorry,
talk about
Siri.
that too. No, I mean that before we switch on to that, that's a really interesting topic. But it's those little things, and we've had this conversation before. I have a Nexus 4 that I don't use a lot because the scrolling is like nails on a chalkboard. But for many people, the inability to do inter-app communications is that same nails on a chalkboard thing. And GarageBand was just updated using a third-party service to do inter-app communication, which to me is bizarro world.
It's wild, and it's this third-party service. Like it's not a hack. Like it's using all the legitimate stuff, but it's using these legitimate APIs in a way that maybe Apple didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
But the fact that Apple took this thing that is sort of like leveraging this API in a non-standard way that wasn't intended, like they're adopting this third-party standard that these developers created and all just started working together on. I actually find that really heartwarming. I think it's great. I think that that's the kind of interaction with your developer community that we want to see, and hopefully it's a sign of other sort of long-standing. Oh, why can't we have apps talk to each other? Whatever developer complaints there might be getting addressed.
It amazes me that 6 years later, in a whole regime change, we're still looking at the gravity of dark matter to try and figure out what's happening with Apple and their direction.
It's Apple, man. I mean, what do you want?
So, the whole Google Now, Google search thing was baffling to me this week. And if people are listening and they're not aware of it, Google Now is a fantastic service. I have it on Nexus 4. I have it on Nexus 7. I love it. If you're familiar with Siri, it's somewhat like Siri, but it goes further. It's predictive. It's what Roger McNamee talked about in the early days of WebOS, right, Dieter, where it knows where you are and when, and it can predict stuff. Now, to set the stage, a while ago, Google Search was updated with really good voice querying. And in a post, I said it's like Google Now. And I got a very nice note from Google saying, please don't say that Google Search is like Google Now. Google Search is a product for iOS. Google Now is exclusive to Android. And we're not making any comments about that. So I was told very nicely.
In fact, when they launched Google Now, I was on the Nexus 4, wasn't it? Okay. No, it was on the Nexus 7, or whatever it was. When they launched Google Now, like they had that same distinction of like Google Now refers to this area where these cards show up. It's not the same thing as hitting the voice search button, and so it's not the same thing as Siri, because Siri's about voice search and then assisting, and Google Now is these predictive cards. And it's like, come on. I mean, if you're gonna take a whole bunch of stuff and merge it, we want to call that something.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a call it thing. The best brand that you give us.
But that's an interesting conversation too. But so Eric Schmidt, who to me is this generation's Steve Ballmer, and that's funny because Steve Ballmer's still around, but he says the most remarkable things. And it's not that he says them; it's that they're preposterous on the surface, but he acts like, and this is maybe I'm wrong, but he acts to me like he thinks we're dumb enough to believe him. I don't think he believes him, but I think he thinks we're dumb enough to believe him. And one of them was...
man, I think you're giving him way too much credit. I think that he just decided he wants to be a cranky old uncle.
Maybe. But they feel a little bit manipulative. So the one this week was that they asked him, what about Google Now for iOS? There was a leaked video and there was a bunch of interest in it. And he said, you have to ask Apple. And that led to some strong suspicion that Google had submitted Google Now to Apple, and Apple was either rejecting it or putting it in limbo. But you guys found out that's not the case, right?
Both Apple and Google have said no. Apple said we don't have it, and Google said, yeah, we didn't submit it. So like Schmidt just went off and started talking about stuff. He talked about the Google Now thing. He mentioned like he's still using a BlackBerry. Like, dude, really? Really? If you're still you're Eric Schmidt. If you are still using a BlackBerry because you love the keyboard, I'm sorry, make a Nexus device with a keyboard.
Yes.
I would buy that.
It's that's a couple interesting things. Not only did Google tell The Verge that Apple told The Verge that they did not have Google Now in approval. A lot of people immediately thought, oh, well, Apple's just being clever. They've submitted an update to Google Search that includes Now, because look at this still from this video. Apple told you that there was no applications pending review in
nothing. Yeah, and then they told, I think they told John Pachowski at All Things D, or Google told John Pachowski at All Things D, yeah, no, we haven't submitted anything to that. So,
which is the BlackBerry thing is interesting, but Apple got a lot of heat for that, and there were people. If you look at the comment string on The Verge, you look at it on iMore, people were lambasting Apple for that. And when Apple said that Apple's lying, then Google finally said it. I don't understand the comment from Schmidt. I don't understand either he went off the reservation or it was manipulation. The point about the BlackBerry, and we talked about this on the original smartphone the first time he was caught with it. I think it was during their second round robin, where some companies like BlackBerry and Apple, that they love those devices. Mike Lazaridis is down there with their screwdriver every day working on the radio, and Steve Jobs is flinging that thing at people's heads. And it felt like Microsoft and Google kind of just felt they had to have screens in the game. And I cannot imagine a situation where Tim Cook or Torsten Heinz would be consistently using a competing product in public for years. Yeah, no,
it's insane, right? It'd be like, I don't even know what the analogy would be, but it's like Eric Schmidt is such a dyed-in-the-wool, old-school business guy that he can't imagine not having a BlackBerry. It's like part of his identity or something.
Make one, like you said, make one. The man runs he's one of the people who runs one of the biggest companies in the world. He can have any phone he wants. He can give us any phone he wants.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. And then he also talked about keeping Android and Chrome OS separate, and that was like when Sundar Pichai went over to take over Android. They're, including me, a bunch of people are like, well, it seems obvious that you're going to need to do something with these two divergent operating systems at some point. But he's like, no, they're going to stay separate too. So, like, yeah, whatever's going on over there with Eric Schmidt, like they need to have a chat, or maybe you're right. Maybe it's intentional, and he is doing some kind of manipulation here. That he's sort of there. He can go out there and say stuff, and then Google can deny it later, but they still get the story out there.
Yeah, he's either Jim Balsillie or I'm going to get the guy name wrong. Vic Garunda. Gundotra. He's one of those two people. I'm not sure which one yet. It could be either. Yeah, to me, so it's fascinating that we went from a world where the 2007 iPhone event, most of us had Trios, some of us had Blackberries. We saw that WebOS gets introduced, Android gets introduced, and now we have, at least the first time I can remember, every company fielding a modern device. Maybe we don't like some of them as much as others, but all of them would work for someone who wants to buy a smartphone today.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and BlackBerry, they're called. It's so hard for me not to call them RIM. By the way,
yes.
They just, Z10 launch day, and that's 6 years. So Steve Jobs was actually wrong. It wasn't 5 years to catch up. It was 6.
But a lot of that was stubbornness. It was years of them refusing to. I mean, to Google's credit, people say things about Google and say things about Samsung, but to their credit, they pivoted on a dime and they got their stuff to market really quick.
Yeah, no, completely. And they got their stuff to market really quick, but more to the point, they got Verizon and other carriers that didn't have the iPhone behind the right products, or at least behind products that could be competitive to change the market and get some real share.
So the other news that was kind of big this weekend, was shocking to a lot of people who had followed Apple for years, was that they hired Kevin Lynch.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So for people not familiar with Kevin Lynch, he was the chief technology officer for Adobe. But most people are familiar with him because he was, in essence, the front man for the Adobe side of the Apple-Adobe Flash feud. He wrote several blog posts. He starred in a Takeoff Mythbusters video about it. And that man is now going to report directly to Bob Mansfield as Vice President of Technology at Apple.
And hopefully never be involved in marketing anything for Apple ever.
No, I don't think he'll
never speaking in public again, except in small developer panels. Because that video of him, that Mythbusters parody, oh man, it was bad.
Was it worse than the last BlackBerry developer sing-along video?
Oh, that's a hard one. That's neck and neck right there. I'm going to say no, that the BlackBerry video is still worse. But so, I mean, your take that you wrote up on iMore on Kevin Lynch is really good. And I think Michael Mace wrote up something good about it as well. Like, it's a little weird. And, but I don't, I guess basically right now my take on it is, I mean, I mostly trust Apple's judgment still in their executive hiring and executive decisions.
Wow, post-Rowett, that's awesome.
Well, yeah, well, they've had some problems, so that's why I say I mostly trust. But I think that, I mean, come on, the people at Apple aren't stupid, right? They know that this was a guy that was I'm going to say it. This is a guy that was a flashpoint of controversy.
Yes, nicely said.
And, so they took that into account, that it was worth the everybody going, what? Kind of PR hit to get this guy. They think he needs something. I mean, I guess I could play devil's advocate. I mean, I've used Flash on mobile. I used Flash on mobile for when they first started pushing it back in the day on, Windows Mobile, and it was on like a Java platform, some RTOS on some other phone, and something else I can't remember.
Use it on the Palm Pre, famously.
Yeah, and it was bad on all of those platforms. It was very, very bad, but it worked, right? And so to play devil's advocate for just a moment here, Flash on my computer on my Mac, on my ridiculously powerful Mac that was built less than a year ago with a ton of RAM and more processing power than I know what to do with. I start up Flash, just a Flash video that's doing nothing more than like displaying what I know is probably an MP4 back on the server, spins up my fans and sets the thing on fire.
Yeah.
Right? So that's Flash's performance on an insanely powerful computer. So the fact that this guy maybe was involved in getting Flash to work at all on phones in 2008, maybe he's a pretty good technologist.
That's almost like the argument that says, whatever you think about Windows, the fact that it boots on a million different hardware SKUs every day is an engineering miracle. I think that's true. The Gruber's point, Gruber had a very confused reaction to it. His reaction was confusing, but he was confused by the decision. And he stated, and I think it's a valid point, that even if Kevin Lynch was towing the company line, that he was saying that Flash was great because Adobe employed him and said that it was great, as chief technology officer, that was acceptable in 2008, but by 2010, the writing was clearly on the wall, and he should have already positioned Adobe better for the future than just trying to ride the Flash train into the explosive, diehard ending.
Yeah, I mean, it was easily clear by 2010. I would think that it was clear before that, but people got different personalities, and he just likes being out there and positive about his company's thing. I don't know.
Manton Reese was interesting too. His take was that it's a toss-up. Is he the wrong guy, or was he just the right guy in the wrong job? And he will be the right guy at the right job at Apple.
Right. I mean, him being so flamboyantly pro-Flash in such a public way so late in the game does give me pause that he's the right guy. But for now, like I said, I'm trusting Apple that they saw something in him that they really wanted, and that didn't bother them.
John Pachowski at All Things Digital said that he heard that his role at Apple is going to be coordinating between the hardware and software divisions. Because initially it was announced that he's reporting to Bob Mansfield, which seems like an odd fit because he was a software and services guy. He's the guy who took Creative Suite and put it on the Creative Cloud, which makes him feel like an Eddie Q services iCloud guy. But he was given to Mansfield, who's making antennas and chips. And that seemed really odd. And him being used as a liaison seems really odd. So there's also a theory that maybe he's just orbiting right now and Apple isn't announcing where he's ultimately going to land.
Maybe. I mean, I think that being the guy between hardware and software does make a lot of sense. Although it's funny, right? I mean, isn't Apple's whole bag that they keep those things very tightly combined and together, and so they're better than other companies. They don't need to have, a guy at a senior VP level come in and make sure that they're taking meetings with each other.
Especially after they reorged to increase coordination and communication.
Right.
So
I think that's the context we have to look at this hire in. This is a Tim Cook hire.
Yes. This
is a Tim Cook, new Apple, new collaboration, new everybody's talking to each other, and the silos don't have giant 10-foot steel walls with barbed wire at the top. They're only 8-foot walls, and there is a gate.
Well, I mean, there's an advantage to that. One of the continued criticisms about Microsoft was that they kept everything in silos. They had duplicative efforts. They were mean-spirited towards each other, based a lot on Microsoft's corporate culture, which involves very strange managerial tactics and a lot of internal competition. Android has gotten, Google has gotten a little bit of that too, with reports of like the Chrome team not getting along with the Android team. And it's a problem with big companies. Apple's always been organized in a cell-like unit where you have tiny little teams of people grouped together to try to keep a startup environment going. And I wonder if they're always trying to keep that corporate culture from really stagnating at Apple. Yeah.
I mean, I think that Apple worked, especially well, what you mentioned, that they have these little cells. And so if you've got a group that's, not more than 20 people, it's hard to form a bunker mentality and hate that other group over there. But if you've got a group of, 150 people, politics become very different in terms of dealing with some other corporate division that also has 150 people. But it's, I think it might be inevitable that Apple needs to get their groups to that size in some of their divisions. And so I think Tim Cook's challenge is to make sure that they don't get what's the word? I can't think of the word. I was just say they don't get tribal, right? They don't get right. And I think that's like these stories of them coming out and like they're being more collaborative. These stories that have come out that they're I don't know they're talking to press a little bit more. They're being a little bit more open. We are we're looking at Tim Cook's Apple. That's like and what's funny is like I think it's been Tim Cook's Apple for quite a while. But we're now, because it's Apple, we're just now starting to see their corporate face look like it from the outside.
Yeah, it's almost like there was a series of strategic steps, bringing all of software together under one guy, bringing all of design together. So they used to have one guy running iOS, one guy running OS 10. And to some extent, that resulted in duplicative activities because you had, the Safari team and the mobile Safari team. Jony Ive, apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, had his own little software team doing specific things that they didn't want to share in early stages with the actual human interface group at Apple. And now that seems to have gone away. So it does seem like Tim Cook is running through the halls, kind of removing a few of those vault doors that used to exist.
Yeah, and so then the question becomes like, now that those doors are gone, Apple's going to be operating itself in a new way. Can it do so successfully?
Yeah, and it was, I forget who said it, but there was a series of decisions that looked to be like Apple. We know that Apple, Tony Fadell lost the battle to Scott Forstall about using the iPod OS versus versus OS 10 on the iPhone, and that resulted in a lot that reduced massively the amount of technology Apple has to maintain and we've seen that things like QuickTime 10 or QuickTime X, I'm not sure which X version they use on that one, got moved back from the iPhone to OS 10. A lot of the things that Apple does now, they get to use across their entire platform. And even though they're the richest company in the world, that's a huge efficiency score for them.
Yeah, and Microsoft is finally there with Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8, although there's some more that they could do to bring those together. But I think that those two operating systems are about on par in terms of their synergies with iOS and OS 10. And I think that Google needs to get there with Chrome and Android. They're not at all. And I think that their decision to bring Sundar Pichai in charge of Android maybe is a sign that they want to also have those synergies. So, Apple's out ahead there. And I lost my train of thought. But there you go. You're right. Good job, Rene. Thanks.
Well, Android always felt, and we discussed this a long time ago, like a not very Google product. Because it was local, it was native. They bought it from the guy who created Danger, Andy Rubin. And I always had this little joke in my mind of Google saying, oh, we have to get into mobile. What can we do? Oh, we're going to buy Andy's thing. We're going to buy Android. And then WebOS came out and sort of smacked their head and goes, that's what we should have made. That's a Google-like product. But instead of buying that, they started, because they already had Android and it was gaining traction, they kind of spun up Chrome OS, which is maybe even more Google-like than WebOS was.
Yeah.
And they're sort of trapped between the product that works, the old world product that works now, and their sort of visionary product that doesn't quite work now.
Yeah, I'm using Chrome OS. I've got a Chromebook. It's okay. It's Chrome, and the apps aren't quite there yet. The window management isn't there yet, which is really frustrating. I need more than 2 windows and a couple of tabs to get around with my stuff. But yeah, they need to do something to make Android feel a little bit more googly, and they need to do something to make Chrome have more apps and a little bit more native power without losing its web-centric nature. So both Android and Chrome have something that the other guy needs, and badly. And so it makes a lot of sense for them to get them to start working together more. And, like the Chromebook Pixel, as ridiculous as it is, I'd like to think that they didn't just put a touchscreen on there because they could.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that there's a plan for Chrome OS to integrate touch stuff. That has to happen. It really needs to happen at this I/O event next month.
Like the Cylons, they have a plan.
Right. But I'm also kind of worried maybe they don't. We like to assume that Google has a giant master plan, especially since Larry Page came over.
Yeah.
They've got a lot more direction than they used to. They don't just try random crap. But there's still let's just try some random crap.
They're canceling the random crap.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, man. Okay, so if you guys don't refer to Google Reader, which has been canceled, and there's been a lot of drama about it.
Nerd angst.
Nerd angst. I gotta say, I am. I mean, I wrote a piece about it, but basically, like, I think that the best thinking about what needs to happen there is probably coming from Marco Arment. Of Google Reader came in, it sucked all the air out, but RSS is important as plumbing for the internet. I actually think it could be more important than as plumbing for the internet, but I'm not dedicated to like RSS as a standard. Like it could be JSON, I don't care. As long as every site continues to use it and offer it for other apps to take advantage of. But what's weird about Google Reader and it's clearly they didn't feel like they had enough users, but Google supposedly makes their business on monetizing information about you, right? They monetize. They see what you search for. They can advertise against it. They see what emails you're getting, and they can advertise against that. They see where you are in the city, and Google now can throw up a information card, and like maybe they'll put ads in there someday. On and on and on and on. They monetize what they learn about you. I have a really hard time believing that they couldn't think of a way to make money off of millions of people telling them what the most important things are on the internet in news.
I wonder, I have a suspicion, I don't know if this is true, and credit where it's due, Brent Simmons saw the writing on the wall for this a long time ago as well, that when they started playing around with Reader, it was for the benefit of Google+. It was to try to move some of the engagement and the social activities to Google+. And I wonder, which is exactly what you said earlier, that Google is figuring out their core brands and what is most important to them. If Google Now and Google Plus and things like that are the core brands, and they will sacrifice some things that are interesting and maybe provide a lot of information and are certainly beloved by a key influential part of their audience for the benefit of something like Google Plus, which maybe hasn't caught the traction or the attention that they want it to, and figure they can maybe move some of that artificially there.
Okay, yeah, but here's the thing. They didn't offer a replacement Google Plus substitute that's even in the same neighborhood,
Yes.
much less ballpark of what Google Reader was. They've got Currents, I guess. But I mean, honestly, like if the move is to get people to move over to Google Plus, then you need to give them a path to do it.
Yes.
And even if they had given people a path to do it, I mean, you go out and find me 10 hardcore Google Reader users that are like, oh yeah, I can't wait to use their Google Plus RSS product.
They're canceling Google Reader faster than they're canceling iGoogle.
Right. Oh God. Yeah, it's ending on what, July 1st? Yep.
Yeah. And many people think FeedBurner might join it on the.
Oh yeah, for sure. But okay, so like let's bring this back to Apple. I mean, Apple cancels products every now and then.
And Apple canceled Safari RSS and Mail RSS a year ago already.
Right. So, I mean, Apple doesn't see... I mean, they are still supporting podcasts. I kind of was actually surprised to see... I think they had to update podcasts because it was kind of an embarrassment for them. But I don't see... are people... Does Apple really care that much about the podcast listening audience?
I don't know if they care. Well, they did... At least to me, it looks like they pulled everything that wasn't monetized out of the iTunes Store apps. They took iTunes U out and they took podcasts out, and those now sit in separate apps, which is what people have been asking for them to do desktop, modularization for years now, but that's only really occurring on iOS. And content sells devices for Apple. They say they run the iTunes Store and the App Store barely above break even. And they provide for free apps at their own expense on the App Store. So I think that there is a line of thought at Apple that massive amounts of content helps them makes the case for their ecosystem. So it's very easy. If you look at the verbiage, and I'm explaining this badly, on the podcast app, it starts off the easiest way to, which is very similar to the Passbook verbiage. And I think their idea is to say, look, when you buy this is all the amazing free stuff. They put out a press release for iTunes U recently. So I think for them, it's just an ecosystem investment at this point.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, I'm trying the new version of the podcast app. I actually deleted the old one because I am very confident that it was ignoring my only download over Wi-Fi toggle and pushed my data usage a couple months ago into the 4 GB territory.
Oh, it was worse. So iOS 6, when it came out, had a bug that would have it pull the same packet over and over again. So it would be downloading, and it would go on to Cell, and not only would it download over Cell, but it would download massive amounts of times over Cell. So I had like $300, $400.
Yeah, no, the same thing happened to me. And like, I called AT&T about it. I'm like, this was a bug. It's not really my fault. And like, no, that only happened on Verizon phones. That didn't happen on our iPhones. Yeah. Our iPhones are great.
I believe it was Foundation bug. Yeah. Oh, Apple.
How do we get on? Services and supporting products, even though they have small user bases. I guess I trust Apple to hang on to most of its products more than I trust Google right now. And just because they tend to only kill things when they're terrible, and they tend to find a replacement for them. Look at MobileMe, yes. Right? But with Google and its services, like the core stuff that I know they're making money on, great. They're good enough and they're valuable enough that I want to continue to use them. But we're in places where like Google or Apple or whomever, or Google specifically, if they make a product that is like okay, I'm not going to go and choose that anymore because I don't trust them. I'm not going to use Google Keep because I don't. I don't see how they make money off of that. I guess they're collecting data on me, but Evernote and SimpleNote are way better depending on your use case needs, and there's no need for me to switch over to that.
I think you're right about the thing with me is that the products that Apple made that they've canceled were not great products. Like Safari RSS was useful in a certain context, but it didn't do what Google Reader does. iDisk, a lot of people were upset they canceled iDisk. Dropbox, way better than iDisk ever was. Google Reader, I didn't use web interface, but I used it to sync every single RSS client that I had across every single platform, and that was insanely useful to me. So that leaves also. No one really let Apple have that many markets to themselves. Apple wasn't the only RSS reader. They weren't the only online storage. Where Google Reader really was the only online RSS syncing tool. Like NewsGator? Everyone else canceled theirs because Google gave it away for free.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And like I'm more willing to use like a core Apple servicer app than I am a core any other service or app from RIM or BlackBerry or Google, whomever, because I kind of feel like it's going to be there. But there are some things on the periphery that they kill off, and they kind of do it because it's with the times. Like they saw the writing on the wall as far as RSS, and it wasn't that good of a product anyway, so they killed it off. A year later, Google's like, oh yeah, turns out we don't want to do an RSS product either, so they do it. I will never forgive Apple. That's what Apple. I'll never forgive them for killing Sherlock, though.
They Sherlocked it and killed it.
Man.
This is something interesting too. So now we're seeing inverse Sherlocking, which Jason Snell called Moriartying, where things like Fantastical come out and it's way better than Apple's version, and they can actually rise to the top of the app sales charts, making an app that Apple already gives away for free. And there's been a few cases of that where there are apps that are so good that people use them instead of the default. Some people use a lot, like you said, Chrome. Some people use Sparrow, now the Gmail app, or Mailbox, or some of the other ones that are.
Well, we talked about Dropbox earlier too,
Dropbox,
right?
Yeah. Michael Jurwitz had he used to be Apple's developer evangelist. Anyone who went to WWC knows Jury. He was talking about the cost of free apps, where nothing is ever for free. Either they're extracting information for you, but also there's a cost on the market. In a lot of hardware products, dumping is illegal. If you put a product on the market at below cost, it's considered, under certain conditions, considered anti-competitive. But that idea doesn't exist in software. You can give anything you want away for free, and that can destroy the business opportunity for a lot of companies that make great products. And I don't know if the mobile app market is mature enough, but it does seem like it's really hard to extract value from a lot of these platforms, especially for independent developers.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw prices go from what they were before the iPhone, where you could charge $15 for an app, and that was
well, to me, it was $30 on my Trio Deater.
Yeah, I know, and I paid it.
Me too.
Man, bug me. Oh, There's a note sync platform. Um,
It's like $1.99 on iOS now or something.
yeah, yeah. But prices are starting to come back up for apps on mobile. But in terms of, you can't compete with free. The question for me is, what is the purpose of a calendar app or a notes taking app or a podcast app coming from Apple? And I'd like to think that Apple is trying to cover the basics and the bases. And that if you're a power user, Apple's okay with you moving on to some other more powerful app.
It's table stakes for them.
Right. So it's there so that, your mom, your grandma, your whoever can go and buy an iPhone and not have to go looking for that stuff. That's a beautiful thought. I don't think that's true because if it were true, then they would open up the platform more, so you can get more. I mean, the fact that Fantastical is even possible on the iPhone, I feel like is kind of amazing. Like I'm actually kind of surprised that they can get the access that they need to make that product and get into the calendars and stuff. So that didn't used to be the case. So I don't worry too much about Apple or whomever releasing a core app on a mobile device that is going to suck up the market, as long as it's not that good and as long as they offer access. But I don't know that both of those two things is always the case.
Well, Sparrow was a paid app, and they couldn't make a go of it. They got bought by Google. Mailbox was a free app. They barely had a chance to see where they would go with it, and it was bought up by Dropbox.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because paid, obviously, especially with the amount of money you can't, maybe Jurid had this great line. He said, like, if you double the cost of your app and you lose less than half your customers, you're making money.
Right.
And that's not a mentality that's widely embraced, especially after the race for the bottom. But there's a Lighthouse client, just came out, $10. There are apps that are coming out and trying to stake a price, put a price stake in the ground. And I want those kind of apps. I want the kind of apps that are, the two-guy boutique shop, very specific, very well done. Because I think there is a user for whom time is more valuable than money. I paid for Fantastical because it's much faster for me than the built-in calendar app. And whatever they charge, I think it was $3, $5. It's so little. It's like less than a cup of coffee for me to save 30 seconds a day over every day for a year, 2 years. Well worth it to me. And I wonder if that's going to be a market for them, that they can aim it for people who are less price sensitive and more convenience sensitive.
No, I think the market's there. I think that it wasn't there initially. It wasn't there in 2009, 2010. Because there just wasn't that much smartphone adoption. But I think we're at a place now where there's enough numbers where you can there's a small enough segment of that big pie that you can afford to sell to.
Pocket Cast is making money on Android, Dieter. Obviously, if you know your markets, you can.
Pocket Cast is pretty good. I'm
awesome.
Pretty happy with it. Yeah, I mean, I've been a dog catcher guy, and I just finally started really trying it. I know it's been out for a while, and it's been the hot stuff for a while, but I'm using it. I'm pretty happy with it.
They Androided first.
Yeah.
So I guess the last thing I want your take on is, and we kind of referenced it a little bit in the beginning, is presumably we're going to have iOS 7 this year. Apple's been fairly good about what they've been perfectly good about once a year software upgrades. Last year, arguably, they treaded water because their biggest effort was spent on redoing a Maps app. And regardless of whether the Maps app is good or not, that's a tremendous amount of engineering work to make a Maps app. Very few companies can actually make and deploy a Maps app. It takes tremendous resources.
Come on, hang on. There's a million Maps apps. I mean,
to redo to build a Maps app from scratch, I think is where the bulk of their time on iOS 6 was spent.
Yeah, I suppose. And I guess, to be fair, the companies I'm thinking of have been doing Maps apps for years. I'm thinking of your Telenavs, your Waves, your Nokias, your Microsofts, there's a few others. So, okay, I will grant that making a Maps app is pretty tough.
It's non-trivial. All I mean is it's a non-trivial undertaking. It's not like making a little doodad app, like a two-guy development team app, like the remote app for Apple.
That said, just because it's hard doesn't mean we can forgive Apple for doing such a terrible job of it.
I'm not forgiving them. I'm just saying I think that's where a lot of their time went, and that's why we didn't see as much on iOS 6. They also outsourced all their social. They set up Passbook. Going into iOS 7, it's another difficult year because Scott Forstall left while iOS 7 was underway. Jony Ive is stepping in. Craig Federighi is stepping in. But the stakes are much higher. Samsung threw a tremendous amount of spaghetti at the wall just last month. HTC has a bunch of really interesting features. The Z10, I'm Canadian, I have to call it a Z10. It has a bunch of really interesting gesture navigate. There's a lot of ideas out there. iOS being the oldest mobile platform now, Springboard looking essentially the same way that it's looked since 2007. Dieter, what's a realistic goal that Apple should be skating for with iOS 7?
Visual refresh, not a complete interaction refresh. I would like to see, like I said, better inter-app communication. I think that's realistic. I think it's also realistic that they do something with Notification Center to make it not a joke.
I want it to be actionable the way WebOS was and the way Android is becoming.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it completely ought to be, and I think that there's just not very good thinking about like the clearing, how it gets cleared out, and like this. They did it to do it. They didn't do it to make it a useful, help me get my job done.
It works, but it's not elegant.
Right, and it doesn't even work. Like it's there, and it shows a few things, but like it doesn't empower me.
Yes.
In a way that I feel like my phone should. But I think the most important thing for Apple with iOS 7 is not to act like, here we are, we're totally changing iOS and we're doing this amazing thing. They need to pick one or two features. One of them is probably going to be Siri related, and that's a great target to smarten up Siri a bit more and maybe have it start to be more predictive. And like, a little bit of a visual refresh so it, it looks a little bit different, but still basically operates the same. So I know this is crazy because I kind of went after Apple for not just doing a whole bunch of polishing for iOS 6, but I feel like if I'm Apple, I pick one or two features that people will focus on and be like, hey, wow, that's cool and new. And I do a little bit more polishing, and I save all of my big guns, my big resources for iOS 8. Because by then it'll be like, oh my God, they need to change things. Like, it'll be very bad. And I don't think that like they've got anything in the chamber to fire off, this summer or fall, whenever they launch the next iPhone, that's going to be, mind blowing, to continue the gun metaphor. Right. So don't act like you do. Just like, we've done these things. Here's this one new feature that's amazing. And it looks a little bit cleaner. We've done a couple of those things, and they are still strong enough relative to Android where like that'll be enough. People will be like grumble, 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 and that's fine. But they should just like take their lumps so that they can do something completely crazy that like makes me say, why am I carrying a laptop around? They can do that if they can do that in 2014, I'm okay with them doing something kind of right in 2013.
So you raise a couple quick questions for me. That's interesting. When people jailbreak now, a lot of the things you hear about them jailbreaking for is, for example, Grandpa Zephyr. So you get the gesture navigation on the iPhone, Byte SMS, so that I can't stand widgets. I'm too lazy to go and look at a home screen and find stuff. I want that stuff coming to me. I want that text message to be respondable in the notification. Email. I want audio controls the way Palm had them in notifications. Those seem to be the things that users are telling Apple, at least a certain level of users are telling Apple are interesting to them. But I wonder if the iPad and the iPhone also have to diverge more, if to be that real fancy car that will replace the computer, the iPad needs things like user accounts or needs things that
they've got to do user accounts. If they don't do user accounts in iOS 7 for the iPad, I am going to flip a table.
Can that be an iPad-only feature, or do they have to keep the platforms in parity or the devices in parity?
I don't care. It can be iPad only. I don't see any reason why it needs to be on the iPhone. I mean, if it's free and easy, do it on the iPhone too. But they have to do it on the iPad. iPads are shared with families. My brother, he bought my old iPad, and he's got a 3.5-year-old son, and he has an iPhone too. And he literally is keeping them on separate accounts. He's not getting to use his apps across his phone and his iPad. He's not doing his own email on the iPad because he had to make that iPad like the family iPad. Yeah. And so all of the benefits that you get from being on a single platform across your phone and on your tablet, there's a lot of people just choosing not to do that because they don't have multiple accounts. They got to do that.
You take your home iPad to work, and suddenly everyone's looking at your stuff. It's just not.
Yeah. And with regards to like the interface stuff on jailbreaking, yeah, I would like to see better notifications. I would desperately like to see the notifications work better. There's way too many toggles. Number one. Number two, the way that the toasts, the little alerts come down from the top, that's insane. In fact, I should have mentioned it earlier. Like the number one reason I jailbroke my iPhone is so that I could get those skinny alerts that just take up the status bar instead of coming down over the whole thing.
I just throw those away all the time because I can't. I'm not patient enough to wait for them to clear, so I grab them, throw them away. It's almost like a whack-a-mole game for me now.
Yeah, but I mean, Apple chose back in the day to put the primary navigation element of the entire OS, in my opinion, second to the home button, the back button, in the upper left-hand corner. I still don't like that decision, by the way, but fine. You're going to put your navigation way up there in the upper left. Cool. But then you choose when you do notifications to cover it.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
You're covering the second most important navigation element on your entire platform all the time.
My other gripe is that it's still back. Oh, suddenly it takes you to another screen. It should stop when that button changes. It should stop so that repeated hitting of it does not. Many gripes. I wonder if they could do multiple user accounts in a way that if my mom gets an iPad and it's hers, she never even knows it exists. Sort of like my mom my sister never uses fast app switching. They never use any of those things. They're a total mystery to them. If you go into settings and enable user accounts and then suddenly you have them, that way the hundreds of millions of happy iPad users don't worry about them, but everyone else can, anyone who uses it in business or in a multiple family environment can flick a switch and have that, almost like flicking a switch and having default apps. It's a user. You have to do a user action to enable them.
Yeah, I guess I'd be fine with that. I mean, to be honest, I don't think that it's necessary to stick a toggle, especially on an iPad where you've got so much screen real estate. I mean, look at the lock screen on an iPad. It's just, it's your big wallpaper. Like, you put a little, head in the lower right-hand corner. It's like, switch accounts.
And have a guest account. Please have a guest account.
Oh, yeah, definitely have a guest account.
Right now, you have to use guided access to lock it in Safari if you want to do a guest account.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things that I could foresee happening in iOS 7. I could foresee them building in the necessary bits to support the Apple iWatch.
Yeah. Do you have any parting thoughts on the iWatch, Dieter?
I hope they do it well. But my main thing is I hope that whatever support they build into iOS to support their watch, I hope that they support, let other, like the Pebble I've got here, talk to those as well. Because I'm sure the iWatch is going to be really great, amazingly great. But more so than with phones, people want to have different watches. And if Apple's not going to make that, at least make a gesture towards letting that be an open ecosystem for people, I'll find that to be a huge bummer.
Yeah, if they at least provide some level of open API support for whatever the watch is pulling.
Right.
Dieter, that was awesome. It was like old home week for me. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's been a ton of fun. It's been really good talking to you. I'm happy to come on anytime.
I know a lot of people already know where to find you, but for those few people who aren't already following you, where can they find you?
You've got way more followers than I do on Twitter, so don't act all humble about this. I'm just saying.
You're just a reserved Minnesota guy. You never really, there's never a, hi, I'm Dieter, I'm over here.
Hi, I'm Dieter. I'm at theverge.com, and on Twitter I am at Backlon, and I'm searchable. I'm on the Facebooks and the Google Pluses.
If you Google Backlon, you'll find almost consistent Dieter content.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, thank you very much, Dieter. I really appreciate you being on.
Yeah, thanks, Rene.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. For all of our shows, you can go to mobilenations.com/shows. And if you haven't already, please stop by iTunes, leave us a review, leave us a rating. It encourages iTunes to feature us, and that's how we get to meet more great people like you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.